All right. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started at the top of the hour. I have placed the link to the workbook in the chat if you would like to download that, and we will get started right at noon. Well, alrighty, everybody. Welcome. It is noon, and we are going to get started. Um, at the top of the hour. All right. So if you'd like to drop in the chat where you're from and what the weather is like there, you can feel free to do that. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Janefra, and I will be leading this masterclass for you today. Um, I'll get into my bio and my background in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to get into a little bit of what emotional intelligence is. And I just want to remind you all that there is a workbook. I have placed the workbook for those participants who are here live with me in the chat. It was also in the email that contained this Zoom link. It is not at all required, but I thought it might be helpful. So if you'd like to grab that so you can follow along, you can feel free. And I've dropped the link to the workbook in the chat for those of you who are participating live via Zoom. Alrighty, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to start the recording for those individuals who cannot be with us live so that they recording in progress so that they will get the full experience as well. Alrighty, let us get started. Alrighty, let's make sure we've got everything sorted and we can go ahead and get going. All right, everybody, we are now recording. Welcome to 7 tips for emotionally intelligent leadership. Like I said, if you'd like, please feel free to drop in the chat where you are from and what the weather is like right now. I am currently in the Washington, D.C. metro area. It is hot, it is humid. D.C. was built on a swamp, and that is very, very apparent in the month of August. Before I get into my bio and before we get started on the nitty-gritty, I just want everybody to think of whether or not you are a morning person or a night owl, whether you're somebody who absolutely needs to have your coffee or tea or some sort of caffeine or quiet time before you interact with people in the morning, or if you're just ready to go right away. I want you to file that away in your brain, and we're going to come back to it later. And before we get into the tips and before we get into my bio, as I said, my name is Janaf Farasian, and I will get into who I am and how I came to be here in just a few moments. Before we do that, I want to quickly define what emotional intelligence is. That way, we're all working with the same information. So the definition that I've got for you today is emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. The term was first used in the 1990s by 2 researchers, John Mayer and Peter Salovey, but it was later popularized by a psychologist named Daniel Goleman. And what Goleman did was he highlighted the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership. And he told the Harvard Business Review, quote, The most effective leaders are all alike in one crucial way. They all have a high degree of what has come to be known as emotional intelligence. It's not that IQ and technical skills are irrelevant. Those do matter, but they're entry-level requirements for executive positions. So that was his quote. So you've got to be technically qualified first, right? That's the floor for executive positions. And I would argue for any kind of leadership position. But then in order to excel in a leadership position or an executive position, you need to possess emotional intelligence. And that's why we're here. All right. So as I stated before, there's a workbook for you to be able to follow along and take notes to see some of the key points that I'm going to be talking about regarding emotional intelligence and the 7 tips that I'm going to be able to give you. There's a link to download it in the email that contained this Zoom link. But if you don't want to go searching for that, there's a link to the workbook that I've dropped in the chat for you as well. All right. So let's get started. Why are you here today? You could be here for a variety of reasons. Hopefully, you're here voluntarily and you weren't voluntold to come to this. But even if you were voluntold, I think you will get something out of it. So you might be here because you're not quite sure how to talk to your teammates or your client or your boss. Maybe you struggle with small talk or building rapport with other people. Maybe your organization or your company or your department has pretty high turnover rates. And you might be struggling with an underperforming team. It could be a situation where small issues on your team snowball into much bigger problems. Or maybe sometimes you feel like you just say the wrong thing, or you say something and it's a little bit awkward and it doesn't really land well. If you'd like, you can please feel free to drop some of your reasons for being here in the chat. And some other reasons that you might be here. Maybe you often feel misunderstood. Maybe you get upset easily and you have outbursts. Maybe your conversations are strained. Maybe sometimes you wish your team members tried harder. Or you could be in a situation where you feel like you've literally done everything right and you've still not gotten promoted. If any of that sounds familiar, you're in the right place. And like I said, if I didn't cover a reason or if you've got another reason for being here, you can please feel free to drop that in the chat as well. Okay, so now we're going to turn to what are we going to learn today? We're going to learn why emotional intelligence is critical for effective leadership. It matters for profits. If you're a nonprofit organization where profits aren't really a thing, it matters for employee retention and it matters for employee engagement. We will do a deeper dive into what emotional intelligence actually is. And then we're going to examine how to use emotional intelligence to increase your effectiveness as a leader. And then finally, I'm going to give you 7 concrete tips for emotionally intelligent leadership that you can take with you when you leave this masterclass today. All right, so what are the business costs of low emotional intelligence? And there are actual business costs to this. The information that I'm going to go over is pulled from an article from 2023, so the costs could very well be higher right now. So according to Gallup, only 21% of employees are engaged. 60% of employees are emotionally detached at work, and nearly 1 in 5 are actually miserable. This has massive financial implications. So employees who are not engaged or who are actively disengaged cost the world $7.8 trillion. So that's not million, that's not billion, that's $1 trillion in lost productivity, which at the time was about 11% of the global GDP. So based on that same research, about 75% of organizational issues are relational and they're not technical. So what that means is it's people problems. And whether we like it or not, people are driven by their emotions and they're influenced by their own and by others' emotional intelligence. So what do these people problems look like? What do I mean when I say people problems? So I've got a few examples for you here. They could be a boss that micromanages and as such demoralizes employees with their excessive demands and lots of feedback. You could have a team leader who plays favorites, or who exhibits erratic or unpredictable behavior. You could also have a supervisor who makes promises only to then break them and then not address the fact that they broke their promise. These are just some examples, and there are countless others. So if you'd like, you can drop into the chat any examples you have of that type of behavior that you may have encountered on the job. So then what happens? What does this type of behavior result in? It results in lost productivity because people are not engaged, potentially higher turnover because who wants to work for a micromanaging boss or a team leader that plays favorites? And then you've also got lost revenue because you're losing people who know what they're doing, and then you're constantly having to train new people. All right. And then we've got some more stats that I'm going to get into for you. All right. What are the effects of emotional intelligence on company performance? So, a company that prioritizes emotional intelligence is 22 times more likely to perform higher than companies that don't. And then you've got emotional intelligence and the effects that it has on a micro level too. So, for example, your team. Working with colleagues who lack emotional intelligence can cut your team's success rate in half. Emotional intelligence affects turnover rates too, and I've got some data for that. Emotional intelligence interventions in the workplace, like one-on-one coaching, which I happen to offer, or perhaps even a workshop or a training on how to improve your communication and how to improve employee engagement, which I offer too. Those types of interventions can reduce employee turnover by 63%. So what that means is that you're not constantly training new people, or you're not losing seasoned people or that seasoned employee that's been with the organization or the company for years, who knows exactly how to handle a very difficult client or who knows exactly how to handle a particularly sticky situation. You get to keep that person. You get to keep those employees because you've reduced employee turnover. All right, and here's some more data. So, according to the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report for 2025, so for this year, at least three of the top 10, and I'd argue at least five of the top 10 core skills in 2025 have to do with emotional intelligence or soft skills. You've got resilience, flexibility, and agility at number two, motivation and self awareness at number five, empathy and active listening at number seven. And then I would also say leadership and social influence at number three, and then curiosity and lifelong learning at number eight. Those are soft skills as well. So what there is there's an increased recognition of the importance of emotional intelligence. So you can let me know, think about it, if you're surprised to see any of those in the top 10, or if you're surprised at the rankings of any of those. All right, I hope you're all getting something out of this. And for those of you that stick with me for the whole hour, I've got a little gift for you at the end. This is for those of you who are with me on the live as a thank you for joining. All right, so my promise to you for the duration of the time that I have you is to give you my full attention and to provide value and insights over the course of this hour. And I would ask that you lock in and you promise yourself that you're going to focus and engage as best you can, so that you get something out of the content that I'm sharing with you. Okay, so who am I? Who is this person that is talking to you? Hi, I'm Jennifer Rossian. I'm a former diplomat, kindergarten teacher, asylum officer, and Princeton graduate. Go Tigers. So I was a diplomat for about 6 years. This is me on my very first assignment in Seoul, South Korea. I was a foreign service officer, and foreign service officers or FSOs do 2, 3, or 4 year rotations, either at embassies overseas or at the State Department in Washington, D.C. That photo was taken at the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. The Secretary of State was coming in for a visit, and we had to do an advance trip to prepare for her stop there. I was the ambassador's staff aide for my last 6 months of that tour, and that was definitely a crash course in honing my emotional intelligence and my communication skills. Those blue buildings in the background are where they had some of the negotiations to end the Korean War. And then here's me again with some soldiers in the background. The path beyond that pillar in the photo is actually a walkway to North Korea. And another one of my assignments while I was in FSO was that I was assigned to a global health position where I helped negotiate UN resolutions on behalf of the United States as part of one of the UN programs efforts to end the global AIDS epidemic as a public health threat. Prior to my time as a diplomat, I was and still am the eldest daughter. I had three younger siblings, that is them, many, many moons ago because that photo was not taken on a digital camera. This is also me with my cat Yuki. Yuki passed away. He has since crossed the Rainbow Bridge, but we had 12 wonderful years together. So anyone who's an oldest child knows that you hone your negotiation and conflict resolution skills at a very, very young age. If we've got any oldest children here, you can let me know, or any middle or youngest children who remember who was responsible for resolving the fights that you might have had with your siblings when you were growing up. After I graduated and left the nest, I went to Princeton for undergrad and then I went to Harvard for graduate school. I was Woody Woo at Princeton. We don't call it that anymore. The school has since been renamed, but that's what it was called when I was there. It is now the School of Public and International Affairs. And we have reunions every year for every class year. That's what the photo is on the left. And I loved it there. I made many lifelong friends, and it was the last time in my life that I got free laundry and free printing. And I did not appreciate those things as much as I should have at the time. After Princeton, I went straight through to graduate school at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and I got my master's in public policy. Then after that, I went into the State Department, and then I left state because I wanted to be more stationary, and I thought I'd be interested in education policy. But I didn't think I could effectively make policy around something that I'd never done. So I taught kindergarten. That lasted for 1 year, and it was the hardest job I have ever done in my entire life. There were 25, we had 25, 4 and 5 year olds in one room with two teachers. I was not alone, but it was still the most difficult job I have ever had. And then after that, after I left the charter school, I came back to the government to US Citizenship and Immigration Services, where I was an asylum officer. So I interviewed applicants applying for asylum, and then I took another position in the agency and interviewed people applying for green cards and citizenship. And then I took another position where I am now, where I answered inquiries and still worked on cases and helped develop internal career and leadership development trainings for other officers. So I'm incredibly familiar with the immigration process, even though I have not gone through it myself. And then we get to communication coaching. So every single job that I've had has had a critical communication component, helping people say the hard things effectively so that the other person can hear them and then make a clear, informed decision based on all the accurate information available is what I love to do. So to go from garbled messages like the ones that we used to get when we played telephone when I was little, I'm dating myself, but I don't know if anybody else remembers that game. Before smartphones, we just had to make things up. So I enjoy helping people go from confusing, garbled messages where they're not quite sure what's going on to clear, effective communication that gets results and gets you the outcomes that you want. So I noticed that people would constantly come to me with questions about how to navigate a tricky situation or what to say to their boss or their teammate. And I realized that people had questions about this, and that's how I got started. So I really enjoy that helping people navigate difficult conversations and helping people communicate effectively. It comes pretty naturally to me, and I realized that I could help people do that. So here we are. And that's a little bit about me. Now we're going to get into what we're going to cover today. So there's 4 areas that we are going to discuss, and they are: what is emotional intelligence? We're going to do a little bit of a deep dive so we get really, really clear on what that is. We're going to talk about why it matters. We're going to talk about whether or not how good you are at this now. And then we're going to get into the 7 concrete tips for emotionally intelligent leadership. All right, so first, what is emotional intelligence? What do I mean when I say those 2 words? So remember I said at the beginning, I offered you a definition, and I said that emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. And so we've got a little bit of a grid about how that works. And so what you've got in the top left corner of your grid, you've got awareness of yourself, self-awareness, and then continuing with ourselves, you move down in the grid and you've got how you handle your own actions. So that's self-management, self-control. Then we get to others. So that first there's awareness of others. So what is your social awareness? And then finally, there's the actions of others, and that's relationship management. So what do all of those mean? All right. Okay. All right. Let me double check and make sure that people who want to get in are able to get in to the waiting room. I am recording it. Let's see. Admit, admit. All right. Okay. Waiting room. All right. So I think there were some people who were in the waiting room that I have just admitted. All right. Yeah. Okay. Invite. All right, great. Okay. All right. So I think I have admitted everybody who was in the waiting room. I'm sorry that I did not get to you beforehand. I did start the recording, so I am going to continue where I was, but you will definitely be able to go back and hear it from the beginning. So let me keep going. And I've gone through my bio, and now I will continue on to what is emotional intelligence. All right, so emotional intelligence. I've got this little grid right here, and I'm going to just repeat this and then we'll keep going. So, emotional intelligence, the definition that I'm working with today, is the ability to understand and manage your emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. And so we've got this grid of how that works. You've got self-awareness in the top left corner, and then you've got self-management, so how well you handle your own emotions. And then you've got social awareness, which is your awareness of other people's emotions. And then we get into relationship management, which is exactly what it sounds like, but I will get into that in a little bit more. So let's start first with the parts that involve the self. So the parts that involve us. Self-awareness. So self-awareness is at the core of everything. And one of the biggest issues regarding self-awareness is that 95% of people think they're self-aware, but only 10 to 15% of people actually are. And that could pose some problems for you and your team. You could potentially be one of the 95% of people, or you might work with somebody who thinks that they know how they're coming across to other people, but actually has no idea how they do come across. So self-awareness is at the core of everything. And what it describes is your ability to not only understand your own strengths and weaknesses, but to recognize your emotions and their effects on you and your team's performance. What I've got on the screen right now is an emotions wheel, and that can be a game changer if you have trouble recognizing and identifying your own emotions. So the first step in being able to manage your emotions is to admit that you have them and then to correctly diagnose what those emotions actually are. The solution to address being angry, for example, isn't necessarily the solution that you would use to address being hurt or being nervous. Those require different things. Also, it's really good to recognize if you get upset at being interrupted, for example, before you have your morning coffee or before you have your morning tea. So then if it's possible, if you have some control over your schedule, then maybe don't schedule early morning meetings if you can help it. If they're unavoidable, they're unavoidable. And we'll get into recognizing how you can manage your own emotions and yourself a little bit later. All right. And then we get to the second piece of self, which is self-management. Self-management refers to your ability to manage your emotions, especially in stressful situations. Leaders who lack self-management tend to react first, at times without thinking, and then they can have a harder time keeping their impulses in check. So a reaction tends to be automatic. You don't think about what it is that you're doing. So maybe think about a boss that you've had, for example, who might have just yelled at you when something went wrong. Or I had a professor once in college who just threw chalk at me when I said something that he didn't like. So that was a demonstration of a lack of self-management. So I'm just going to ask how many of you have worked with somebody who maybe could benefit from better self-management? I think we all have at some points in our career. So you can let me know in the chat if you've had an experience at work where someone just reacted and engaged in a behavior that wasn't okay. Or maybe you've been in a position, right, where you reacted in a way that you didn't like. We're all human. That all happens sometimes. But the more, oh, hang on. Let me see. Oh, okay. I think I'm going to mute everybody. All right, perfect. And then for those of you that I just let in the chat, I dropped the PDF of the workbook that I sent out. If you want to be able to follow along with what it is that I'm talking about, there are parts in it where you can take notes for yourself if you would like. Alrighty, so let's see. Oh, okay, self-management. All right. So maybe you've been in a position where you reacted to a situation in a way that you didn't like. But the more in tune you are with your emotional intelligence, the easier it'll be to pause and to take a pause before you respond and not just react. So the reason this is important, that it's important to take a moment, to pause, to take a deep breath and collect yourself, is so that you can respond deliberately and intentionally versus letting your emotions get the best of you. And what this will do is it'll help you appropriately and intentionally respond in stressful situations and when you're faced with any sort of adversity. Let me just check and make sure I don't need to admit anybody else in the waiting room. Nope. Okay, we are good. All right. And then we get to the other people piece of the puzzle. So we've gone over understanding and managing your own emotions, and that's one piece of the puzzle. But you also need to know, to a certain extent, how to read a room and how to read people, at least a little bit. So social awareness describes your ability to recognize others' emotions and the dynamics at play within your organization or on your team. So leaders who excel in social awareness practice empathy. They do their best to understand their colleagues' feelings and perspectives, which then enables them to communicate and collaborate more effectively with their peers. So you can let me know if you've worked with somebody who's really, really good at social awareness and picking up on social cues. So some more statistics that I have for you are a global leadership and development firm, DDI. It ranks empathy as the #1 leadership skill, and it reported that leaders who master empathy perform more than 40% higher in coaching, in engaging others, and in decision making. And then there's a separate study by the Center for Creative Leadership, and those researchers found that managers who show more empathy toward their direct reports are viewed as better performers by their own bosses, right? So communicating with empathy means that you can better support your team, but you can then also improve your own individual performance. All right, and then let's just check the waiting room. Perfect. And then we get to relationship management. This is your ability to influence, to coach, and to mentor others and resolve conflict effectively. This might feel like you're walking a tightrope sometimes. You don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to make things worse accidentally. And sometimes it might seem like it's easier to avoid conflict. But what that does is that just leads to a buildup of issues over time because they don't just disappear. So research shows that every unaddressed conflict can waste about 8 hours of company time in what they refer to as gossip or other unproductive activities. And what that does is that puts a drain on resources and it puts a drain on morale. So if you want to keep your team happy and productive, then you actually need to have those tough conversations. So you can think of somebody you know who's maybe really good at this, right? You can drop it in the chat and let me know what it is that they do that makes them really good at managing relationships. And then in a survey by the Society for Human Resource Management, 70%, 72% of employees ranked respectful treatment of all employees at all levels as the top factor in job satisfaction. All right, so why does this matter? Why does emotional intelligence matter? We're going to come back to that. It matters because if you do it well, then you get more productive teams and you get more engaged employees, which leads to, if you're a for-profit entity, increased revenue. But whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, it also leads to increased productivity and reduced employee turnover. It also matters because between 80 to 90% of competencies that differentiate top performers from others are within the realm of emotional intelligence. So the things that make the most difference for top performers have to do with emotional intelligence. So in case you're wondering if you can tell how good you are at this now, I've got a free assessment that you can take to help figure that out. I will drop a link to that in the chat at the end of the webinar so that you can go and access it. It's free if you'd like. It's got a series of questions where you'll be able to see how well you are doing in certain areas and then maybe see if there are other areas where you might need to do some work. All right. And so now we're going to get into specific areas where we all might need to do some work. And so I've got the 7 tips for emotionally intelligent leadership. We're going to go through each of these one by one, but I've listed them all out together first. And they're also laid out individually in the workbook so that you can follow along there if you would like. All right. Number 1, increase your self-awareness. Number 2, increase your self-regulation. And like I said, we're going to go over these individually, but just to lay them all out at once first. Number 3, ask questions. Number 4, get to know your people. Excuse me. Number 5 is listen. Number 6 is don't judge. And number 7 is be respectful. All right. So we've got the first tip, and that's to increase your self-awareness. What does this mean? It means figure out what you are feeling, broaden your vocabulary for your own emotions, perhaps through the use of an emotions wheel. There's the one that I've got for you on the screen. I literally found this via Google. So if you want to just Google emotions wheel, you will find a variety of different ones, but this is just one example. So you figure out what you are feeling. Then you figure out why you're feeling that way. Maybe you journal about it. Maybe you talk it out with a trusted friend or a colleague. Maybe you've got a therapist or a coach or somebody who supports you. You can talk it through with them. And you want to get to know yourself and your moods. And the reason this matters when we're talking about your effectiveness as a leader is harkening back to the thing I asked you about at the very, very beginning, right? Do you need coffee or do you need tea or do you need something specific in the morning before you get started so that you can show up as your best self? Do you need some quiet, whatever it is that you need, so that when you start interacting with your people, when you start interacting with clients, you are showing up in the way that you want to show up. All right. So then we get to step 2, increase your self-regulation. What does this mean? What am I talking about? Now that we know what those emotions are that we're feeling, because we've done step 1, we can examine them and then we can observe them. We can examine them like they're data and we can observe them. So we don't want to punish or beat ourselves up for our reactions, but we do want to work on being able to show up in a way that aligns with our values. So if you want to be respectful of everybody, for example, then yelling at a team member might not align with those values and your desire to be respectful of others. So then we get into figuring out ways to stay grounded when you get stressed. And doing that can help you react in ways that do align with your values. And because practice makes perfect, or at least makes things better, If you work on developing a protocol for yourself, literally like a series of steps that you can walk yourself through when you do start to get stressed, then you can help ensure that you react in a way that you want to when situations like that come up. And if something happens and you don't react in a way that you're proud of, then you can have a protocol for that too, right? We all make mistakes, we're all human, and we can allow ourselves to be human while still taking accountability and doing our best to show up as our best selves. Then we've got tip number 3. Ask questions, and ask questions like you care about the answers. This goes a long way towards building rapport with anybody, but especially with your team members, especially with clients, especially with people that you're going to interact with on a regular basis. So you can ask your clients, you can ask your boss, you can ask your colleagues about their lives. Now, nobody is obligated to give you a window into their personal or private lives at all, but asking shows that you do see them as a whole person and not just in the context of their job or just in the context of their work. In addition to that, asking questions is also good if and when you don't understand something. So if you're given instructions from your boss or a client is asking you for something specific, if anything is particularly unclear, ask the question. Like, get clarity, get clarification from them, get clear on what is being asked of you so that you know what to do going forward. And finally, asking questions also entails asking for feedback, especially if you're a manager, but in general for everybody too. Ask how that presentation went. Ask how the interview went. Ask how the client call or the meeting went. Ask how the project went. Do a sort of after action review. Ask if there's anything that could have been done differently or could be done better going forward. This is especially true if you manage or supervise people. Your team members might not feel comfortable providing feedback or input to their boss. So you want to make sure that you are giving them the space to be able to do that so that they can then share their ideas or their feedback with you and know that it's welcome. Then we get to number 4, which is getting to know your people. And this is exactly what it sounds like. I want you to work to understand their perspectives and where they're coming from. That's something called cognitive empathy. So, the ability to understand another person's perspective. It's like that old saying where you imagine you're walking a mile in another person's shoes. This will help you explain yourself to them in meaningful ways. Then we get to emotional empathy, which is the ability to feel what somebody else is feeling. Now, I think this is what most people think of when they think of empathy, right? Feeling what somebody else is feeling. So if you're not able to do that because you don't have a similar experience, that's perfectly okay. All I'm asking for you here is to work on developing the ability to recognize that someone else might be feeling something different than what you're feeling, even in the exact same situation. And so, if you're able to do that, then that can be particularly helpful in reading group dynamics and managing a variety of different individuals. And then we get to empathetic concern, which is the ability to sense what another person needs from you, right? And this is a careful balancing act of managing your own needs without numbing yourself to what other people are going through. So you can be in a situation where you want to help, and you can. You want to help your clients, you want to help your employees, you want to help your team members, but you want to make sure that you do your best to ensure that helping others does not come at complete expense to yourself, right? It's important to be aware of and to be empathetic to other people, but we have to make sure, and you have to make sure that you take care of yourself too. And then we get to number 5, and that's listening. And let me just check. I don't think anybody else, nope, nobody else is in the waiting room. Okay. Number 5 is listening. That's probably the simplest tip that I've got for you, but it might be one of the most difficult ones as well. When I say listen, that's literally what I mean. When somebody asks you a question, or rather, when you ask somebody a question, listen to their answer. Let them finish their thoughts before you offer yours. When you ask somebody for feedback, listen to their answer before you offer your take on what they've said. And when somebody comes to you with a question or an idea or a concern, even if you know that you can't do anything about it because you know you don't have the budget or you know that that's not an ask that can happen in the particular situation and circumstances that are present right now. Even if you know all of that, listen first. Now, I'm not telling you to let somebody yell at you or to railroad you or to speak to you disrespectfully or to not let you get a word in edgewise when you are trying to say something. I'm not saying you just have to sit back and listen and take that. You absolutely can and you should stand up for yourself when necessary. What I'm talking about here is letting somebody finish a thought and not interrupting them, provided that they're speaking to you in a respectful manner. And I'm asking you to really listen to what somebody is saying before offering an answer or before offering a response. And then we get to number 6, which is don't judge. Now, this might seem difficult, and I'm not saying here that you can't judge somebody. You are absolutely free to do whatever you would like. What I'm saying is if you want to build relationships with people and you want them to communicate openly and honestly with you, then you need to hold off on judgment. So I want you to think about whether you've ever been on the receiving end of somebody judging you and how that made you feel, right? Like it doesn't feel good. And so all I'm saying here is that I don't want you to inadvertently do that to other people. Now, you don't have to fully agree or even completely understand their situation in order to refrain from judging. You can validate their situation or their feelings as real to them, even if they don't make sense to you. Now, again, this does not mean that you just let somebody continue to believe something that is not true, right? Or that you don't correct an incorrect or false assumption. You absolutely should do that. What I'm saying is that if somebody opens up to you and tells you something vulnerable, particularly in a work setting, that it's important not to judge them. Because if somebody does that, if somebody opens up to you and they tell you something vulnerable and then you do judge them, then why would they want to tell you anything more in the future, right? Like, why would they want to tell you more things if they opened up to you and they were met with a reaction that was pretty insensitive and then they felt like just kind of shut them down? So, don't offer your opinion unless asked or unless you ask first, right? And then don't assume that just because somebody is reacting differently than you would, that their reaction is wrong. It could just be different. And then we get into please don't tell somebody how they should or shouldn't feel. Now, feelings don't excuse certain actions. I'm not saying that people will get a get out of jail free card. I'm not saying that you should give license to unprofessional or disrespectful behavior. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that please refrain from telling somebody how they should or shouldn't feel because that is just not going to set anybody up for success and that's not going to end well. And then we get to the final tip, tip number 7, which is be respectful. Don't yell at your colleagues. This might seem pretty obvious, but please be polite in your interactions. Again, that might seem pretty obvious, but it's not always the case. And then don't press them for information about their personal lives in an inappropriate way. What do I mean by that? So I have a client who once told me a story about how one of her colleagues ran out of the office for an emergency and asked for all of her appointments to be rescheduled. Like she got a call and then just booked it out of the office. And what happened next was their boss proceeded to call and text this employee who'd run out of the office to ask if she could still join a meeting that afternoon. So that's what I mean when I'm saying be respectful, because that behavior was not respectful. So, how can you work to make sure that you are being respectful of others, that you're being respectful of other people? One way you can do that is to just ask. Ask for feedback on what you do well. Ask for feedback on where you could improve, right? Like your team members or your colleagues or clients. I don't know if you want to ask clients, but you could. If they're a trusted, individual. You can ask them to tell you what it is you do well and what you could maybe do better, right? And then reflect on that, reflect on the information that you've gotten, and then be honest with yourself about what you need to work on. So, is there a situation, you can think about this, where you maybe reacted in a way that you didn't like, right? I'm not asking you to share, I'm just asking you to think about that. So, if you've got a situation like that that you can think of in your mind, then it's important to know that, right? To be self-aware so that you can then set yourself up for success and being respectful in your future interactions with other people. And finally, there's something that I want to emphasize, and I want us to be careful not to confuse obedience with respect, right? You do not have to be obedient to be respectful. You can question things, you can question situations, you can bring up, things that other people might not have thought of, and that is still respectful, right? And also, other people don't necessarily have to be obedient to you in order to show you respect, right? So, again, I'm not saying you give people license to be disrespectful to you at all, but I'm just saying to show up in a way where you are being respectful of others and to not confuse obedience or deference, honestly, with respect. All right. So now we've covered four different aspects of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, and we've examined 7 tips for emotionally intelligent leadership: increasing your self-awareness, increasing your self-regulation, asking questions, getting to know your people, listening, not judging, and being respectful. So I'll have a Q&A period at the end of this, but I want you to think about what about any of those that I've just talked about was surprising to you, if at all, right? Or was maybe something that you hadn't thought about before. So all of those things that I just went over, the emotional intelligence and then the 7 specific tips for what you can do, is there's learning about those things and then there's putting them into practice, putting that knowledge into practice. So I can sit here and talk to you all day about what you can do to become a more emotionally intelligent leader. And I gave you those 7 steps, which are a really good starting point. But the difference comes when you start implementing all of those things, when you start putting them into practice. So there's more to it than just listening to the 7 steps. And that brings us back to what you've got now, right? And why you're here today. Maybe it's because you were struggling with an underperforming team. Maybe it's because small issues snowball into bigger ones. Maybe it's because you're doing everything right and you still haven't gotten promoted, or you still are looking for some degree of recognition or influence that you don't have yet. So there's what you've got now. And then what you would rather have, right? Recognition and rewards for your hard work. Maybe a promotion, maybe a different leadership role. Maybe it's increased influence in the role that you have now. Maybe you want a team that runs like a well-oiled machine. You've got clients that love working with you. You've got projects that go off seamlessly, career growth, business success, whatever it is. So you've got a choice. Now, I don't know if you're cat people or dog people. I happen to love cats. I love dogs too, but cats are my love. So in terms of your choice, right? It's not as simple as are you a cat person? Are you a dog person? What I'm talking about is you can choose to take the information you've learned here today, to take your workbook and do the work on your own. Or you could explore what communication would look like for you and book a free strategy session with me to see how you could get to where you want to be. A lot of people struggle, and I would love to be able to hop on a call with you to chat about what we can do to get you to the next level, if that is something that you are interested in. Again, if that's something you're interested in, you can let me know. I will provide you with the link to book a free call. If you just want to take the information that I've given you here today and do the work on your own, absolutely do that too. I hope you have got something out of this session today. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a free bonus checklist to thank you for sticking with me for the entire masterclass. I'm going to drop a link to a PDF in the chat, and that's the bonus that I promised you all at the beginning of the masterclass. And while I do that, I am going to open it up for Q&A. So you can all come off of mute if you would like and let me know if you have any questions. What I'm going to do is I am going to stop the recording so that the questions will not be on the recording. So let me just do that, and then I will open it up to questions while I get you all the link to the PDF. So let me stop the recording and then drop the link to you all, drop the link for the PDF in the chat. And if anybody would like to come off mute and ask any questions, you can feel free to do that now. All right, let me get you the link to the chat. Drop the link in the chat. Here we go. Bonus checklist. Open. There you go. All right. Okay, the checklist is in the chat for everybody who's joined. If you have any questions or if any questions come up rather, that you want to ask later on, you can feel free to do that. I've put my contact information up here. And I will drop, yeah, I dropped the link to the bonus in the chat. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Going once, going twice. If nobody has any questions, then I want to thank you all for joining me here today. I will give you 10 minutes back in your day. And that is all. You're welcome, Julie. Thank you for joining me. All right. Thank you all for joining this webinar. And I hope you have oh, yes. Yes. Very helpful in family environments too. Yes. It's applicable across the board for all types of communication, right? Personal and professional. All right. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Let me end the meeting. Meeting for all.